So hello, hopefully you found this video all right, everybody. I'm going to introduce people in a moment, but just firstly, I'm David Turner, one of the pastors here at TCC at the Beacon. This is the first of our Beacon conversations. The idea being that we kind of gather around a subject, an idea, and just have a conversation about it and hope that it will provoke a wider conversation amongst people and within our church. So we'll get on to the topic for today in a moment, but first just going to ask people to introduce themselves. So many of you recognize Trevor. So Trev, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself? How long you've been at TCC? How long you've been a Christian, that type of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Trevor Coates. I've been at TCC now for about 60 years. I'm not sure when I became a Christian. I don't really remember a time when I I didn't sort of have some kind of love or knowledge of God. At the age of 15, I was baptized in the Spirit, and that's when my Christian life really took off. Now I'm happily married with two grown-up sons and grandchildren, and a very nice. I got a nice family, a lovely church family, and I enjoy being retired, and life is pretty good for me, really, on the whole.
Brilliant. Thanks, Trev. And then Lucie.
So I suppose I was brought up as a Christian, so I went to Sunday school on a Sunday. When I was younger, I went to TCC Youth Club when I was a teenager. I grew up in the village, just round the corner. I used to live on Kenneth Road, so I've sort of been around, and then just went off and did my own thing for a number of years. Until I became a wife and a mother, and life got busy and stressful, and that sort of led me back to the church. So I did Alpha. It was about 5 years ago now. So
Brilliant.
Brought me back.
Awesome. I said we're going to have kind of themes for these big conversations, and the first one that we're discussing today is anxiety. And I guess anxiety with a bracket of mental health and those wider mental health issues. And I guess the thing that's provoked that to an extent of being a conversation that we want to have is obviously the current situation of coronavirus, COVID-19, and the issues that's brought on, but also the issues that are being projected for the future and the impact on people's mental health. I think we all recognise that over probably the last 10 years or so, the awareness of mental health has really increased. I think over the last 5 years, 2-3 years, that's really been stepped up, and there's been a conversation that's been happening in the wider public as well as in churches. So we just want to really talk about that issue today, and I guess place that conversation around anxiety alongside faith and how those two work together, because I think on the face of it, they seem like contradictory ideas. But I've kind of asked Lucie and Trev to be involved today because having had previous conversations or heard of their past experiences before with anxiety, with mental health, and having an awareness of that in their own life, but also having conversations with others in that same situation. So I guess we'll start with you, Trev, as I asked you before. As I said, me and you have kind of spoken about your experience of anxiety and stuff in the past. Do you mind just sharing a bit of your experience with that?
Yes, sure. Well, I when I was working, I was a registered nurse. I started working for Fair Havens, the hospice in Westcliff, when it opened in June of 1983. Initially, I was employed as the assistant matron there, and then I became the first Macmillan nurse, and then became part of a team of 6 Macmillan nurses. So I was based at Fair Havens, but working in the community, supporting and advising patients in the community. And I was usually the key worker in the situations I found myself in. So I was the one making the decisions. I was the one explaining things to patients and their families. The three commonest questions I was asked were, am I dying? When will I die? How will I die? And my role was very much to explain things in quite a lot of depth. So I was sort of dealing with death and dying at a very deep level all day, every day for a number of years. And it was that, I guess, that took its toll on me eventually. And I just eventually I cracked up, I think, just because of the emotional pressure. I was initially off for, I think, about 3 months. And then I went back one morning and just cracked up after about an hour and went home and never went back. Um, and so that was my that's what happened. That's what led to my breakdown. I can remember in the time immediately following my breakdown that Chris and Sue at the church were leading a service, and what was happening to me was relevant to their theme, and they asked me if I could say something. And I remember, I don't remember anything I said apart from I said, in spite of what's going on with me, my Bible and my life experience tells me that God loves me. And that's what I'm holding on to. And that was really, I think it was my faith and the support I received from Fair Havens, who were brilliant, but the support I received from Elizabeth and the support I received from the church were really, I think, the things that carried me through.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Trev. And then Lucie, what about your experience?
So I suffered a lot of anxiety and panic attacks when I was a teenager. I think just general. I don't think it was anything specific. I think I've just always been an anxious person. And I think the trouble is with anxiety, it's one of those things that actually it's a normal response. Like anxiety is quite normal. We all have times where we feel anxious about something. But I think what happens is you then almost like fear that anxiety and sort of that becomes a bit of an overload. So it's not about not being anxious, it's about being able to manage it. And I think as that sort of as life brings about things, like I say, teenager, you sort of you leave school, don't you, and you've got all those things that you've got to contend with, and sort of that life becomes a bit more difficult, and the anxiety sort of becomes less manageable, and you sort of get that overload. And I sort of dealt with various things, and at the time, I think really the key for me was, I mean, I have got a really great supportive family. I've been with my husband for a number of years. We've been together since we were 17. So I've got a great supportive network of family, of friends, and everything like that. And that really, really helps.
Yeah.
But I think the key for me really was my dad. My dad was a Christian, and I could always go to him for sound advice. As much as all my family are there for me, he just managed to always say the right thing. Always made me feel sort of comfort, made me feel peace or calm about a decision or anything I made. So I think that sort of really saw me through. My dad died when I was 28. He died the day after my daughter was born. So it was quite a sort of, a time where I would have needed him really. He wasn't there. And I mean, I managed all right. Obviously it was a really, really tough situation, but I think you then, becoming a mother, life just throws things at you. Life's full of troubles, and we know that as Christians we're not adverse to trouble, but I think I really missed my dad's good advice. And the anxiety sort of gradually sort of crept up again. I don't think it just hits you. Anxiety is not a switch that it turns on and it turns off. I think, it's that overload of feelings, and it's sort of again become unmanageable. And I started getting really bad panic attacks. So that sort of stopped me driving places. stopped me going and doing things, reduced like going to social events. And I think the trouble with, for me, it wasn't anything specific, it was just an overload. And I actually ended up having panic attacks, things like when I was at home in bed, I'd wake up in the night and have a panic attack. So that's not a time that you should be feeling anxious and worried about something.
Yeah.
So that's when I really thought, actually, I need to do something about this. So actually, I'd started going back to church. I'd done the Alpha, and I was actually finding that advice really, really helpful. And what I realised was actually that my dad didn't just give me good advice. He gave me God advice, and that was still available. And that was such a comfort. So as much as, yes, I still miss my dad greatly, but that advice and those sort of comforting words, that peace that you get, the sort of feeling like someone's there for you, is actually all still there. And I think that was great for me in sort of coming back. It all started with meeting a friend at the school gates, and sort of, you sort of listen to the things that they say, and you think, oh, that's something my dad would have said, you know. And like I say, Dad always gave me good advice, but he also gave me God advice, and that's still there, and that's really been helpful.
Well, thank you. Trev, just I guess intrigued a little bit. I feel it might be helpful to kind of have you explain, I guess, because you talked about a breakdown, and obviously the cause of that being, a lot of the difficulty of those conversations from Fairhavens. What was like the experience of breakdown for you? Like, what was I guess it might be difficult to articulate, but to the best that you can.
Yes. Well, I think initially it was anxiety. I stopped being able to cope really well. I started making mistakes, not exactly mistakes, but just not functioning as well as I'd once done, and was aware of doing that. I found it difficult just to cope with even ordinary everyday things. Interestingly, I found myself dropping things or knocking things over. I seem to be physically less capable. I remember when it was obvious that I wasn't going to be able to go back to work, that two members of the senior management team from Fairhavens came to see me, and I made 3 drinks, took them into the room, and immediately spilt them all over the floor. Things like that, and I didn't sleep very well. As I say, I was constantly anxious. I was exhausted, just tired the whole time, wanting to sleep, wanting to just sit around, finding things just. I would cry a lot. Simple things would make me cry. Panic attacks. And even now, if I get under too much pressure, I can suffer from panic attacks. I think it really did, in some ways, did damage me. Although it was also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I would not have missed my time as a Macmillan nurse for anything. But I think it probably has damaged me a bit. As I say, and even now, I go through periods when I don't sleep very well, and if I get under too much pressure, I can still have panic attacks.
Yeah. Thanks, Trevor. That's helpful. I think just to kind of get that idea of even like what you're saying about the physical impact of mental health. That it's not just like, oh, in my mind I was worried and I couldn't cope, but actually it had this impact, this effect.
Yes.
And it's almost like a symptom, I guess, of an illness that you have. Lucie, you obviously said that anxiety is not something that you switch on and off. And although that obviously coming to church sounds like it became, I guess, a part of your coping mechanism and something that really helped you frame your thinking again. What was that process like in terms of like coming back to church, doing Alpha, learning about God, kind of getting those foundational things again, and then your anxiety? Did it kind of, was there a point when it started to ease? And what was the catalyst of that? Or has it been, is it still a process that you're in?
I think it's always a process. I think, like you say, it would be lovely to say that you could just switch it off. But it's not like that. And I think the thing with mental health is, what my experience is it's very much like physical health. You can't just go to the gym once and be fit. It's something you have to work on. And I think mental health is the same. You know, you have to sort of stop and have a look and step back, refresh, and just sort of keep yourself in check. And I think it's sort of exercising that mental health as well as your physical health, and it needs that constant practice. And I think that's the key, really. And I think I can definitely resonate with what Trevor's saying, is that sometimes when it gets too much, it's overwhelming. And I can remember going for lunch with my mum, and I honestly couldn't choose what to have for lunch. The thought of what sandwich to have was sort of like, it was really hard decision. And it was like, it's quite scary as well. I think you sort of feel like, you know, am I losing my mind here? You know, I'm just trying to choose a sandwich. And I think that's it. It's that real sort of overwhelming. And I think, like I say, that you need to sort of constantly read things, look at things, talk to people. And that's all our sort of practice of sort of how to manage it, really. Yeah.
I guess I'd like to give a bit of background from myself and then use that as a kind of leap into another question from you guys. So I can't exactly remember all the years now, but I think it was around 2014 when I was, or 2013 when I was diagnosed with depression. Went to the doctors and got diagnosed. And I think especially like as a bloke and a guy, that was just a really difficult thing for me to do, go to the doctors about it. And I remember thinking in my head, you know, after a long sustained period of like struggling, and I think having that, some of those things of, you know, that physical manifestation of struggling as well, like Trevor was describing, thinking to myself, I think I've got an issue here. And I recognised that in my head. And I even started to label it as depression, but I've kind of pushed that thought down quite far. And it took me quite a while. In fact, I remember it was a Christmas Day. It was probably Christmas Day 2013, when I kind of had the appearance I was enjoying myself, but I remember just not wanting to be alive, really. That was the feeling that I had. And I got home and Beth kind of said, what's the matter? You've been a bit absent all day. And I remember just breaking down and saying, I think I'm depressed. Like I couldn't cope today. And that was like the start of me going to the doctors. So eventually then, you know, I went to the doctors, and I remember I can still remember sitting in that waiting room waiting for my appointment. Obviously, no one knows why you're at the doctors, but it was just that feeling of like, everyone's looking at me, everyone knows why I'm here. And Beth had to go with me. And if Beth wasn't there, I wouldn't have gone into that appointment. I would have left before, just because of the feeling of, I guess, that overwhelming feeling, and eventually got help. And then that wasn't like a quick thing. It wasn't like doctors went, okay, yeah, this is here's your 3-step process and you're done. For me, it was like, trying different medications, trying different strengths of medications over like a long period. And it wasn't till about 2.5 years later that I finally slowly came off that medication. And I feel like it's still something, like you say, that I wrestle with today. But so for you guys, what has that kind of request for help been like? Trev, you obviously spoke about a breakdown, and I guess you had people identify it to an extent, it sounds like, seeing you a thing. But what was your kind of reaching out for help? What did that look like for you?
Yes, I'm just trying to remember. I was very fortunate in that my GP at the time, we'd known one another for years. We'd worked together at in hospital before he became a GP. So we got on very well, and he was very supportive. I was never on antidepressants. He did put me on something for my anxiety. So he was very supportive. Folk within the church were very supportive. I found just being able to talk to people sometimes was something that helped me very much. My boss at Fair Havens Daphne Hall. Daphne was amazing and very supportive, and I had other supportive friends. And I think it was being able to talk to people, not necessarily looking for answers, but just talking through how I felt, just talking through what was going on. I think I found that very helpful.
Yeah.
I think talking can sometimes be quite a healing thing, just being able to express how you're feeling, which I was able to do with some people, and certainly found that very helpful.
Yeah. And for you, Lucie, as well, you?
Yeah, again, I went to the doctor, discussed how I was feeling, took some medication to try and help me stop having panic attacks. And I think it's one of those that was actually really hard as well, because you sort of take the medication and you think, oh, I've got this. And then it was almost like a whole nother thing. Right, now I need to stop taking that medication. Is it going to all come back? So that's sort of, it's quite a long process, like you say. It's not just sort of, you know, take some pills and then it's all sorted.
Yeah.
And I think it's changing your mindset as well. And I think that's it's, you tell yourself, oh, I'm an anxious person, this is going to happen, and you make yourself anxious before actually anything happens in the end. And sometimes you'll then fear the fear itself. Before anything's happened. You're not even gone there and not even done that, and you're fearing getting a panic attack before it's even happened, which makes it obviously happen. So I think, like I say, definitely talking to people, going to the doctor, and just sort of recognising. I think that's the key, is just recognising and being honest that actually this isn't just normal anxiety. This is sort of overwhelming, and find it difficult to cope generally with day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I think that thing about you know, the gym analogy that you use, this is a really helpful one in terms of maintaining health, because you know, I think if you, I don't know, if you have like a chest infection, then you know you can take antibiotics and it'll clear up the chest infection and it's gone, and there shouldn't be any kind of long-term necessary repercussions of that, although obviously sometimes there might be, but you know, with regards to mental health, like you said, there's that need to maintain fitness. And even with something like a chest infection, it might be that the instruction from the doctor is actually you could do with getting fitter, you know, and could do with looking at your diet, just so that your lungs are stronger to when you go forward. And that thing of actually thinking moving forward that you need to think about your long-term health and recognize that it might be something you need to work at for a long time. And I think for me, like, the thing I found really positive about the pills is they kind of almost got me to, they didn't make me feel like 100 times better. They just got me feeling okay-ish, so that I could start to process what I was going through and then put in my own coping mechanisms and start to process, right, what do I need to change in my life so that I can cope better when things do start to get overwhelming? How can I get to a place where I'm not overwhelmed by some things, and by my work life or whatever? How can I manage my life better? And the pills gave me that opportunity to do that. And then those things are now what I guess I rely on and turn to. And even at times I struggle with those things, and I can still feel overwhelmed by stuff, or a circumstance can come up, but I've got those kind of first things to try as a kind of starting point. What about, obviously, one of the things that I guess I really wrestled with during my time, and I think if I wasn't working for a church, I would have, I think, struggled for it even more, because I think there's, and it's the balance of faith and mental health. And I think for me, I was thinking, I'm a Christian leader. At the time, I was the youth worker at the church. You know, I knew other young people that had anxiety issues, and I was thinking, how can I teach them about God and trusting God and loving God and sharing faith when I'm kind of like struggling? And part of my struggle at times is thinking, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. And part of my struggle is, I don't know if God's even real anymore, and just really wrestling with those things. So, and like I say, I think it was my job ultimately, which kind of kept me on that path, and enabled me to eventually wrestle those things out. But for you, how does, start with Trevor again, like how for you did that balance come of faith and anxiety?
Yes. Yes. While you were talking, one of the things that I found myself thinking was that there were things I could always cope with that I found I could no longer cope with. I used to think to find myself thinking, well, I used to be able to do this. Why can't I do it anymore? And for a long time, I was both a deacon and then an elder at TCC. And that was one of the things that I stopped. I just couldn't cope any longer with the pressure of being an elder. And that saddened me, that I felt I had to give that up. But I knew I just couldn't cope. And there was a time when I would have been able to cope comparatively easily with that, and felt that I just couldn't anymore. But I don't think there was ever a time when my faith failed me. I don't think there was ever a time when I found myself doubting or anything like that. I was always absolutely sure of God being there for me, and I don't think my relationship with him ever wavered as far as I can remember or recall. And I think certainly that my relationship with him was one of those things that actually did keep me going and did keep me strong, and yeah, just did enable me to cope, to carry on. And I'm not sure I could have done without that. And again, I mean, Elizabeth was just the most amazing support to me. But my church was brilliant, and friends within the church were really very, very supportive. As I say, I've been at TCC for a long while, 60 years. So, you know, I know folk, and folk know me pretty well. And yeah, everyone was amazing.
Yeah. What about you, Lucie? That kind of obviously part of your journey was wrestling with the anxiety at the point that you were exploring faith. So how did that kind of work for you?
I feel a little bit like I was broken before I was fixed. It's one of those, I think I had to go through that process. So it wasn't like I came to church and everything turned out all right. I actually feel like I sort of came to church and actually I almost had to go through the worst then before I could get better. So I think it's, and like you say, it's the support that's around you, the network that's around you. And I think the thing with us is that we are physical, psychological and spiritual beings. You know, it's our mind, our body and our soul. And we need to kind of get a balance of all of those things for us, I think, to sort of function at our best. Yeah. And I think there are times where, you know, we're physically more fit, times where we're mentally more fit, and times where we're spiritually more fit. And it's sort of trying to get a balance for all of those things. And I think really sort of going to church was sort of trying to fix my spiritual side of things as well. How I felt about myself. It's not just about what's going on around you. It's, you know, being kind to yourself and you know, loving yourself and all of those things that really that coming to church sort of helps to look after your own self as well.
Yeah, I've always said about the you know, recognizing that we are mind, body, soul is really important. So I guess a lot of Christians might go, oh yeah, no, we're spiritual beings, and yeah, we have physical bodies, but you know, they're going to go eventually. We go to heaven, we get a new one, but and kind of then exclude that aspect of the mind. And in terms of like a closeness in thinking, I guess mind and soul kind of seem closer together than body and soul. You know, body and soul seem like these two different things, whereas mind has that aspect. And recognizing that to be healthy and as well to live a whole life of faith is to incorporate faith in every aspect of that, you know, in your mind, in your body and in your soul, let it have that impact too. Hopefully this isn't a trick question because I haven't prepared you guys with this one, but obviously like scripture in a couple of places, you know, says things like, you know, do not be anxious about anything. You know, Jesus says do not worry. What would be your kind of interpretation of that, you know, for an anxious person, and especially recognizing that, like we do now, that, you know, mental health is a very real issue. It's not just a real issue for people out there, it's, you know, an issue for people within the church. So, you know, how is it just a simple case of like, oh, I need to learn to obey Jesus better, or is there something else within the scripture there? What about you, Trev? We'll start with you.
Wow. I don't think, as Christians, I don't think we are exempt from the problems and the difficulties of this world. So I think that I think almost in a sense things like anxiety, just as things like losing a job and things like that, are things that can affect all of us. And yeah, certainly the Bible says don't be anxious. And I think even in the times when I was very anxious, I don't know, I don't think I ever felt guilty about feeling anxious. I think that in spite of the anxiety, I just still always knew that that God was there for me, and I had confidence in that. And the Bible has always been, I think, quite important to me, and I've always found a lot of help from the Bible. So even though it says don't be anxious, there are other parts of the Bible that have been just so helpful. One of my favourite passages is John 15 about the vine and abiding in Jesus, and that has been just so much help, I think. Scriptures like that, which remind me of God's love, remind me that he's there for me no matter what. So that even perhaps that didn't make a difference in how I was coping physically or emotionally at the time, there was always at the back of my mind, if nothing else, he is there for me. And I know that, and I know his love, and I know that he will get me through. And so there was always that confidence, I think.
Yeah.
Even though certainly one of the things I don't think I've mentioned is that I lost a lot of self-confidence, and I think still have much less self-confidence than I once had, but perhaps more confidence in him than I've sometimes had.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Lucie, do you want to add anything on that one?
I think really for me, it's just, there's almost like there is, if you've got questions, there's an answer to everything somewhere in there. And I think with the Bible, I think it's a bit like my manufacturer's guidelines now. So like my oven's relatively new. I have to check the guidelines sometimes when the clock goes off, or and I found the Bible a bit more like that for me. You know, it says there will be troubles. It says God will walk with us in those troubles. Be anxious for nothing. Today has its own troubles, so deal with those before you deal with tomorrow. So
yeah.
if we weren't going to go through all these things, it wouldn't be in there. So it's almost like it's okay to go through those things because you know, the answers are there somewhere. The thing I think for me is that we're all different, and we all need something different for our own well-being. There's no answer. We all find help and guidance in different things, and I think, you know, there's lots of advice and guidance for all different people. It's not just, you know, one passage that everybody needs to read. There's all different things, and it meets your needs at the time.
Yeah. I think just something just come to mind really is like, I think whenever the instruction "do not worry" is given in Scripture, it's never like an isolated thing. That's never like the end of the sentence with a full stop.
Right, yeah.
There's always other things. There's a wider context. And the thing that just came to mind is like recently Reuben, our eldest, who's 4, for a couple of weeks was kind of really worrying at bedtime and saying he was scared, and, you know, bringing up different things that would come and take him, like Captain Hook and things like that, say come and get him at night time and stuff. And there was very much a concern. And, you know, I'd often say to him, do not worry. But it wasn't like in a, you must stop worrying and you must obey me now. It was in like, I don't worry because I'm here. It was, you know, and so I wasn't necessarily that I didn't want him to have any sense of worry in him, but it's that I wanted him to know that a more foundational truth, that I was with him. And I think that's what often God wants us to do. And the other thing I guess I'd add is, like you mentioned it, Lucie, about saying, you know, Jesus said, you know, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough trouble of its own. And, you know, really what Jesus is saying there in the do not worry is, you know, don't worry about things unnecessarily. You don't worry about the things that aren't here yet. You know, focus on the present, live in the moment. And yeah, there might be some very real worries in front of you in the now, but let me tell you how to context them and place them. And then I think, you know, things like Philippians chapter 4, which talk about, you know, do not worry, do not be anxious about anything. But there's a but there. It says but in everything through prayer and petition and thanksgiving. And I think like amongst health professionals, like those three things, prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, you know, I'd say prayer is like talking it out. Petition is like asking for help, and thanksgiving is being grateful. You know, listing things that you can be grateful for, which I think a lot of people would say is a really healthy thing to do in amongst anxiety, because it's often looking at the worst case scenario, and obviously thankfulness and gratefulness is looking at the best case scenario. So actually having that attitude of prayer, talking to God about it, petitioning God, asking him for help, and then having that element of thanksgiving within that too can help change your perspective and help you not necessarily lose the anxieties completely, but not allow them to be the only thing that's in your thinking. Just one of the things you spoke about earlier, Trev, and I guess as we kind of wrap up to a close soon, obviously for you, like there was this aspect of like death and being faced with the prospect of death and being around the theme of death a lot, that kind of contributed to your breakdown. And obviously people at the moment are talking about mental health going to be a massive, you know, health issue following COVID. And I guess that linking in slightly to this idea of death, that suddenly people are aware of their own mortality. You know, when before in the West or in the UK, we thought we've got such a good healthcare system, the likelihood of me dying is very kind of low down. And then suddenly every day we're announcing the amount of people that are dying from something. So I guess that I just putting that as a bit of a context of maybe why some people are experiencing concern. But then I guess what would you say into that really, I guess, in terms of you've been around death, obviously what as a nurse of Fairhavens and stuff, and people's kind of concern over that. I guess if we're not careful, it could be like a black hole that we stare into. So what would be a helpful thing in terms of that?
Yes, that's an interest. That's quite a tough question in some way, because with my situation, most of my patients were going to die, and actually knew it. I think the thing that people I supported found most helpful was someone actually being honest with them and saying, yes, you are dying, you're quite right, but you know, there's this help, there's this support, and people wanted me to be honest, people wanted me to talk things through with them, and people also wanted me to be there for them. And I think a lot of the time it was not so much saying the right thing, but just simply being there. The number of times I have sat with people as someone was dying, and they didn't necessarily want me to say anything or do anything. They just wanted me to be there with them. And of course, the problem, I guess, at the moment is that one of the things is that it's more difficult for people to be with someone at the moment, which I think is really tough. And you know, you want people to be alongside you and supporting you. And I think that's the thing. And I don't know it's quite difficult to know just how to do that with people in this situation when you can't physically be with someone and give them a hug. I spent my life hugging, my time as a Macmillan nurse, hugging people, and just really supporting them with my presence and in a sense the physical touch of things, which is quite difficult. But it is being there for people and letting them know that you are there for them, even if you can't, there's nothing you can say. And you know, it horrifies me when people say trite things like it'll all be better in the morning sort of thing, when you know very well it won't be. And things like that. So I think it's being honest with people, being there for people, being prepared to listen. I think listening is just one of the most important things we can do. Say not necessarily to say, but to listen, and let people know that you're listening and know that you love them and know that you're there for them.
Yeah. Well, Trev, you said that was a hard question to answer, but I think you answered it perfectly then. I think I guess there's two levels there. There's the sense of like for other people, so being there for other people, coming alongside them, listening to them, which is so important. And I think, you know, one of the things a lot of places are encouraging people to do during this week of mental health kind of awareness is to reach out to other people, you know, reach out to people, even if you think they're fine or they're projecting that they're fine, just ask them, how are you? And spend that time. But then the second thing you said about being honest and having honest conversations, I think is really important and something that we fight. And like I said, that it was something that I kind of fought against a lot. And there's still like I guess a sense of being uncomfortable of sharing about my experience, because I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to open myself, be that vulnerable and be that honest, but it's important for, I guess, for other people to hear that so that they can be enabled. And I think especially during the COVID situation, like that sense of honesty is so important. I remember probably the first 2 or 3 weeks that lockdown was in place, and I remember just suddenly feeling overwhelmed. And I think it was when the letters were announced they were going to be sent out. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I was going to get one, being an asthmatic. I didn't know if I would or not. And obviously the deaths were going up, you know, every day. And I remember just having this sense of like, oh no, what if I get a letter? What if that tells me that I'm one of the most vulnerable? And it just like overwhelmed me. And then I started thinking about family members that could get a letter. And then I was thinking, oh, what if I did get COVID? What if I did go to, and it spiraled, and it was that overwhelming sense. And I remember like, I guess feeling quite stressed about it, anxious about it. And Beth kind of saying to you, what's the matter? There's something wrong with you. And I remember just kind of crying and saying, I'm scared. Like if this gets me or if it gets my family. And I think all of us have probably had that at some point. What if I get this? What if I die from this? And that overwhelming sense. And it just really helped me just to talk it out. Because I guess some of that talking was like, what Jesus said, you know, I'm worrying about tomorrow when tomorrow hasn't even come. And the reality was I didn't get a letter. I wasn't in that category or that group. So I was worrying for no particular reason. So but the honest conversation helped me kind of go, actually, yeah, maybe I am just overthinking it a little bit. And it was healthy to get it, to speak and get it out. So honest conversations are really important. Lucie, what would you kind of say to someone who maybe has watched this and says, yeah, actually, I struggle with anxiety or I struggle with mental health and I've never really spoken to anyone, or maybe they're just feeling anxious now during the coronavirus situation. What would kind of your advice to them be?
I think the thing is just to talk and just to admit that you need advice, really. You know, talk to people, talk to family, go to the GP. There's loads of stuff online. So if you're nervous about going and finding out any information, just look online. There's just so much available. There's crisis bereavement lines. There's, you know, self-help things. So
yeah,
all good.
Yeah, brilliant. I think like what I guess the theme of this is, you know, calling these the beacon conversations, and the idea is to start conversations and not necessarily amongst, you know, the 200 to 400 people within church that we had, you know, a conversation at once, but that hopefully, you know, people in the 2s and 3s and 4s and in the life groups and in the wider community, we could start to talk about these things a little bit more, especially moving forward. And I definitely would, reiterate what's been said. That sense of, 1, get alongside other people, look out for other people, but 2, make sure that you're talking. And if you're struggling, be honest, especially when someone asks you how you are. You take the opportunity to share, and don't feel afraid to go to the doctors at the minute. You know, I think we maybe put things off, you know, because of the coronavirus, but obviously a lot of the doctors are still able to talk over the phone or do video calls or whatever. So, you know, if you're in that space where you need that, make sure that you do that. I think that's brilliant. I think we'll leave it there. I want to thank Trevor and Lucie for joining me and being honest and vulnerable and coming on video. It's a bit of a unique thing for us to do, but I do really appreciate you guys doing that. And as a church, like we are here and available, and we have people who, you know, have had some training in mental health that have an opportunity just to talk. Of people that are just brilliant at listening. We obviously have our life group structure, which is, you know, groups of people that are there to kind of share life, do life together. Great place for you to kind of be honest and talk about life. So if you want to get involved in those things, and you can message us, email us, contact us through any of the phone numbers or the Facebook page or our website. You can do those things. And hopefully as well over the coming months, as a church, there's going to be a few mental health initiatives that we're going to put out, some mental health training for ministry leaders and group leaders, as well as maybe some other things. So keep your eyes on those. And yeah, hopefully we'll have another Beacon conversation soon. But for now, see you later.